Hello there, Drew Hanish of Whiskey Lore. I am back. Here's a little bit longer. There's a reason for that. I'll get into that in a moment. Have a tasting to do today. Going to get to it in a few moments, but first I am going to tell you that I have, well, first of all, not been feeling great since my return from Scotland. But the idea of the trip to Scotland, which was over 2 weeks long, was to start working on book number 4, the follow-up to my Lost History of Tennessee Whiskey, which should be out in a couple of weeks. Instead, this one's going to go back to the travel side of things, where I start talking about how to travel the west coast of Scotland, all the way down to Campbelltown, the Isle of Arran, and many places in between. A couple of places that are also inland a little bit. But the idea being that if you're going to plan a trip to go to any of these islands, I mean, Ireland is a breeze versus trying to get to some of these islands out here to go to distilleries. I found out the hard way. The weather was the worst that Scotland has had in a long time. It was my payback. The first 2 times I went to Scotland, it was sunny for 2 weeks on each trip, which is unheard of. And then all of a sudden on this trip, it was gales, winds, rain. The east coast of Scotland got a month's worth of rain 2 days before I arrived. And then a week later, it got another month's worth of rain. So there were landslides and roads giving way and all sorts of things. I was on the west coast. Amazingly, the place that usually gets worse weather, I didn't get as bad a weather, but it pretty much rained the entire time I was there. Now, the reason why I say driving around some of these areas is a little bit tough, well, first of all, you got to schedule ferries to some of these locations. If you're going to go to the Isle of Mull, where Ledaig is, where that's one of the whiskeys that I'm going to be doing some tastings on here, doing that one today. But if you're going to Orkney, I didn't get to go to Orkney because the winds were so bad that they were afraid the ships wouldn't be able to dock. The ferries would not be able to dock. It's not a long way to get out to Orkney, but when you see waves doing this from the shore, you go, okay, maybe this is not the place to be heading to. So I did not get to go to Orkney, but I made it to every other island that I wanted to go to. I also learned how to drive on single track roads. I've done it before, but on this particular trip, because some of these distilleries are so isolated, I spent a good, I think between 2 days, I spent about 6 hours driving on single track roads. So that's definitely another experience. One of the drives I had to do was to get out to the Isle of Mull, where Ledaig, or Tobermory Distillery, is located. The town is called Tobermory. And in going up there, I didn't think much about it. I was kind of really looking forward to going to Mull. And then I had to drive 2 hours through the dark on single track roads to get to the ferry to go across to Mull. And as I got to the ferry, I went to get some coffee because it was still early. It's just sun starting to come up. And the woman at the ferry, she said, "You're on the nice side of the ferry." And I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "When you're on the other side of on the island, don't let people run you off the road because they're not always tourist friendly." And I thought, oh, that's what I need to hear. This is going to be great. Well, I went to Tobermory. I didn't have any problems. Half the drive was on 2-lane roads, but then it does end up curving through the mountains on a single track road. But I got through that all right. I didn't have any problems. Got into town and then was catching a little attitude some of the places that I walked into. So I do sense that Mull is not like the rest of Scotland, where everybody says hello to you and everybody is so uber friendly, and then all of a sudden you're on Mull and everybody's kind of like tourists. So the Tobermory Distillery was a great visit, though, and a little background on that distillery. It's kind of tucked in the same way that Oban's distillery is kind of tucked in. It's not quite as cramped, but it's been there for a long time in this one little area. Used to be a warehouse across the street. They're not using that warehouse anymore. It's built on the hillside. It is right on the docks. There's plenty of parking there, so that wasn't really a problem. And then the tour was fun. I was the only one on the tour, so I got to ask a lot of questions along the way. But I really did enjoy it, and I was surprised to find out that unlike a lot of distilleries, like say a Bunnahabhain, which is part of the same company, they actually only do peated whiskeys towards the end of their season for maybe a month. Otherwise, they make all unpeated stuff, and they're on Islay. Ledaig is gone Tobermory's gone the other way, where Ledaig is so popular now that they're doing, as they said, 90% peated whiskeys and only 10% unpeated Tobermory. So this was my first chance to do a tasting of Tobermory while I was there. And I thought it was good, but it wasn't something that enticed me enough to say, let me buy a bottle. Instead, I ended up buying a bottle of the Sinclair series of Ledaig, which I love this whiskey in its 10-year form. And so I was curious to find out what a non-age stated version would be like, and also this idea of it being aged in a red wine cask. Starts out ex-bourbon, then goes to red wine casks. Now the Sinclair name, the Sinclair series, you could call it a Founders series if you wanted to, because John Sinclair was the founder of the distillery, and he basically was looking for land for it in 1797. Took him a year to finally secure the land. He did it on a patch of land known as Ledaig. So there you go. Now we know where the name comes from. And once it was built, I'm not going to dive into too much more of its history, but probably used more peat back then. And then Tobermory, after a while, the non-peated expression would have probably evolved at some point, but it wouldn't have been something they would have been forced to. The Western Isles are really known for their peated whiskeys. So, but anyway, this Founder series, Sinclair series, I was really, really interested in it. 46.3% ABV. I brought 3 bottles back from Scotland, by the way, and 2 small samples. So I will be doing all those tastings coming up over the next couple of weeks. But I wanted to start with this one because of the 3 main bottles that I brought back. They're all peated. They're all finished with either wine, port cask, something to that nature, because those are really turning out to be some of my favorites. And none of these are available in the United States at the moment. I say at the moment, hopefully that changes, because the 3 whiskeys that I brought back, one from Talisker, one from Benromic, and then this one, Primo. But of the 3, this one is the one that's probably a little less delicate and a little more on the aggressive side. But it has a lot going on with it. It's not like with regular Ledaig 10, you're going to get a whole lot of smoke. This one's going to bring the smoke, but there's a sweet berry note that comes in on the nose immediately. It's very minerally. There is a brininess that comes along with this, so you really feel like you're getting something that is being affected by the sea air. I get what I would suggest as like a Fritos note. It's a corn chip. There's a pepperiness to it. And there's even a little hint of chocolate on this. So it's got some really interesting notes. For people who know the Ledaig kind of maybe creosote kind of smoke note, that is there, but it really tends to not dominate as much as all these other different scents are coming in. Cheers. I get like a caramel and cocoa note. Then this thing goes through transitions. It really does. Next thing, that smoke and mineraliness comes out. That dominates for a moment. Then all of a sudden you start getting some of the berry notes coming through. Again, some of the cocoa comes back. On the finish, it seems like the red wine is taking over again because it's sort of got that berry note laying there. It's almost like a Kool-Aid kind of a note. And the Frito peppery corn note that I feel like I'm getting out of this, and there's no corn in this, it's just a single malt, that also is kind of laying there at the same time, throwing me back to my youth. It's like you have Fritos and some Kool-Aid. And I'm getting that out of a Scotch. So it's really kind of an interesting experience. Glad to be back. Sorry it took me so long to get back. Honestly, I'm still fighting, not coughing. It's one of those things where it's just like, almost like an asthma, where your throat feels a little bit tight and you just cough. All of a sudden, it just feels like your throat's a little bit tight. Don't know when that's going to go away. I got an audiobook to read for, so I'm hoping that will change. But I am back on the job here, and we'll be doing more tastings and, of course, sharing more of my experiences over in Scotland and with my writing of the book, as last week I was in Nashville finishing up on some of my footnotes. Hope you enjoyed this. Leave your comments below. Always love to hear your comments. And cheers and Slainte. I think this cost a little less than Ledaig 10 too. If you're overseas and you like the tasting notes I gave you, it's worth a look.